You hear the phrase Israel-Iran war, and what do you picture? Probably jets, maybe missile strikes, right? But what if I told you the real battlefield wasn't in the sky, but on the streets of Tehran? We're about to dig into how this long-running rivalry is playing out as a shadow war, a conflict fought with economic pressure, cyber attacks, and, maybe most powerfully, internal unrest.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get a handle on what a shadow conflict really is. Then, we're going to zoom in on a huge flashpoint, these widespread protests inside Iran, to see what kicked them off, how the world reacted, and what was left when the dust settled.
All right, so let's start with this whole idea of a shadow conflict. This is what happens when a rivalry between two countries turns into something, well, sneakier than an all-out war, but just as destructive.
And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does a modern war actually look like? Because if we're all just picturing tanks rolling across a field, we are missing the main event. We're missing where the real fights are happening right now.
See, in a shadow war, the weapons are totally different. We're talking about crippling economic pressure, the constant threat of a military strike hanging over your head. And this is the key for our story, turning a country's own internal problems into a weapon against its government.
And that is exactly what happened in Iran. This kind of abstract idea of a shadow war suddenly became very, very real when the streets just erupted and the country's internal crisis took the world stage.
I mean, just look at this. This one image from Tehran in December 2025 tells you so much. A burning billboard of the supreme leader. This wasn't a foreign missile strike. This was a fire lit from within, a really raw display of public anger. And it wasn't just a one-off thing. As you can see from news reports at the time, this was happening all over. Protests were popping up in dozens of cities. This was way bigger than just Tehran. It was a full-blown national crisis that showed something was deeply, deeply broken. So what was actually happening down on the ground? To really get what this uprising was all about, we have to kind of dissect it, you know? Look at the what and the why that pushed so many people to risk everything and go out into the streets. It was pretty much a perfect storm of problems. A lot of it started with the economy. Just try to imagine inflation screaming past 42%. Your money is basically in free fall, and the price of just, bread and other essentials is going through the roof. Then you pile on crushing international sanctions and this deep, simmering anger over corruption. And yeah, you've got the fuel for a massive explosion. So what did they want? Well, for a lot of people, it started with wanting the government to just stop mismanaging the economy. But pretty soon, those demands got a lot bigger. They grew from calls for political freedom to, for some, the biggest goal of all, to completely overthrow the Islamic Republic. And they used all kinds of tactics. It wasn't just marching in the streets. We saw organized strikes where shopkeepers, who are a really powerful group in Iran, just closed up shop. People were demonstrating from their own rooftops. And of course, they used powerful chants and social media to get their message out and get organized. And those slogans, wow, they were potent. You had chants of "death to the dictator," which is about as direct a challenge to the supreme leader as you can get. And then you had others looking to the past, calling for the return of the old dynasty from before the revolution. These weren't just random shouts of anger. They were a direct attack on the very foundations of the regime. Okay, and this is where everything shifts into a higher gear, because the world started to watch. A domestic protest suddenly became a new front line in that ongoing shadow war between Iran and its biggest rivals, especially Israel and the United States. And right away, you could see two completely different stories being told. Inside Iran, the official government line was that these were just riots, and they promised a harsh response. But on the outside, countries like the US and Israel immediately came out in support of the protesters, which completely changed how the world was seeing these events. And this support was not quiet. It was loud and clear. You had American officials like Michael Waltz saying it outright, "We stand with Iranians in the streets of Tehran." This is more than just polite diplomacy. It's publicly siding with an anti-government movement. Things got even more direct when Israel's own intelligence agency, Mossad, started posting its support on social media. I mean, this is a textbook move in a shadow conflict. An outside power sees an internal crisis in a rival nation and sees it as another front, another battle in its long, ongoing war. So what happened? Where did all this lead? That brings us to our final section, and frankly, the aftermath is anything but clear. We have to try and count the human cost of the government crackdown and just sit with the really tough questions that are still left unanswered. This table gives us a small but very real snapshot of the cost. The numbers themselves might seem small, but every single one of them is a life. You see protesters killed in places like Faladshar and Lordigan, but you also see a member of the security forces killed in Kudasht. It's a reminder that the violence wasn't just going in one direction. Now, we have to show you this. Our source material includes this absolutely staggering and totally unverified claim that over 36,000 protesters were killed. We're showing you this not because it's a confirmed fact, but because it's a perfect example of the information war that was happening right alongside the protests on the street. Claims and counterclaims like this become weapons themselves. And that really brings us back to this one last big question. When a war is fought with sanctions and social media posts, and by fueling internal protests, where is the front line? Is it on some dusty border? Or is it in the streets of a city like Tehran? Is it on the screen of your phone? Or in the price of a loaf of bread? It's definitely something to think about.